James had never imagined that moving to a new city would lead him to living with an alien. When he found the advertisement for a roommate, it had seemed like any other. Cheap rent, close to work, and not far from the bus station. But when he met Isha, his new roommate, everything changed. At first glance, Isha didn't look like what James had expected from an alien. Sure, she had bright blue skin that shimmered faintly under the light, and her eyes were a striking silver that seemed to glow softly in the dark. She wasn't exactly what James would call human, but her presence didn't feel that strange either. She wasn't like the aggressive alien warriors you'd read about in the stories or see in the movies. Isha stood taller than most humans, almost a foot taller than James, but her movements were graceful, like someone used to battle but with the calm of a thinker. Her hair, a deep shade of purple, flowed down to her shoulders in thick waves. She wore loose clothing that covered her body completely, with patterns that seemed to shift subtly as she moved. James had heard rumors of intergalactic travelers visiting Earth, but living with one, that was a whole new experience. And it wasn't just any alien either. It was one from a species known for their warrior culture, the Melanar. A species so proud of their combat skills that their people rarely left their home planets. And when they did, it was usually to conquer, not cohabitate. But Aisha was different. "I'm glad you're here," she said in perfect English, her voice calm and measured, almost soothing. "The room's yours, James. Please make yourself comfortable." The simplicity of her words didn't make her sound like some battle-hardened alien, just someone who needed a place to stay. James smiled awkwardly, trying to ignore how his thoughts kept drifting to the questions about what life with an alien roommate would be like. He had to admit the idea was strange, but he needed a place to stay, and her offer was too good to turn down. The rent was cheaper than anything else he'd seen in the city, and her promise that she wouldn't invade his space too much helped put his mind at ease. "Thanks, Aisha," he said, dropping his suitcase next to the bed. "I appreciate it." For the next few days, things were relatively normal. Aisha kept to herself mostly, spending her time working from home, something about intergalactic research that James didn't quite understand. But she was always polite, greeting him when he came home from work, offering to help with groceries, and even introducing him to some alien cuisine. It was strange at first, the food she ate, but after a while, James found himself enjoying the odd delicacies. The scent of her cooking filled the apartment with an unfamiliar yet oddly pleasant smell. The apartment was small but cozy, with enough space for the two of them. There was an open kitchen that led into a living room with mismatched furniture and a small hallway leading to their separate bedrooms. At first, the thought of sharing a living space with an alien seemed overwhelming, but soon enough, Aisha's calm presence started to feel normal. Then everything changed when Aisha sat down one evening after dinner, a strange look in her eyes. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her silver eyes locking onto James. "It's important that you understand." James raised an eyebrow, setting his mug of tea down. "What's going on?" She hesitated for a moment, as though choosing her words carefully. "You see, my species, well, we go through certain cycles. The way humans have seasons, we have something similar, but for us, it's not about weather. It's about instincts." "Instincts?" James repeated, his curiosity piqued. Isha nodded, her expression growing more serious. "We enter what's called a mating season. It's a time when the instincts of our species become more dominant." James blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "Wait, you mean like hibernation or something?" "No," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "It's not like hibernation, it's... Well, how do I explain this?" Isha seemed to be wrestling with the words. "It's a time when our emotions, our instincts to connect become intense. It's part of who we are." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the implications of what she was saying starting to settle in. "So what does that mean?" "For me?" he asked slowly, wary of what she might say next. Isha's gaze softened, and for a moment she looked almost vulnerable. "It means that I need to be more close. Not just physically, but emotionally. It's not something I can control. It's just how my species works. The silence hung between them, thick and awkward. James had no idea how to react. He wasn't sure if he should be concerned or just brush it off as something cultural. The last thing he wanted was for things to get awkward between him and his roommate. I understand if you're uncomfortable, Aisha continued, her voice gentle. I won't cross any boundaries, but it's important that you know what's happening. It's a natural part of who I am. James nodded slowly, still unsure of how he felt about it all. Okay. Well, thanks for being honest. Aisha gave him a small smile. Thank you for understanding. From that moment, the apartment felt different. James wasn't sure if it was his own uncertainty or something in the air, but he felt the weight of Isha's words hanging over them both. Every time she walked into a room, he found himself paying closer attention to the way she moved, the subtle way she looked at him. He couldn't quite place it, but something had definitely shifted. The next few days were marked by small changes. Nothing too obvious, but enough for James to notice. Isha started to act more affectionate. She'd offer him a smile when she passed him in the hallway. Her touches lingered just a little longer when they exchanged greetings, and each time her silver eyes would flash with something he couldn't quite understand. James woke up to the soft hum of the apartment, the sun peeking through the curtains. He rubbed his eyes, stretching out in bed. It had been a few days since Aisha had told him about her species' mating season, and he had tried to ignore it as best he could. After all, it didn't seem like anything he would actually have to deal with. It was just some strange alien custom, right? But as the days went by, things began to change. Isha's behavior was subtle at first, small shifts that James had trouble putting his finger on. She was a little more talkative than usual, a little more present. She would linger in the kitchen while he made breakfast, asking about his day, the things he liked to do. James didn't mind the conversation, but there was something in her voice that made him uneasy. It was warm, comforting, but also different. James, Isha said one evening, her voice soft but with an undercurrent of something else. Can we talk? James glanced up from his book, his brow furrowing slightly. She hadn't asked to talk to him like this in a while, and the serious tone in her voice made him pause. Sure, what's up? He asked, setting the book aside. Isha hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I need to explain more about my species' needs during mating season. James swallowed, his heart rate picking up slightly. He hadn't expected this conversation so soon, but he nodded for her to continue. You see, Aisha said, her eyes narrowing as if she was considering her words carefully. Our mating season isn't just about physical need. It's about connecting. The desire to form bonds with those around us becomes very strong, especially with those we care about. James wasn't sure how to respond. So, what does that mean for me? Isha took a deep breath, as though preparing herself for something difficult. It means my instincts are stronger right now, and while I can control them to some degree, I want to be clear about how it might affect our interactions. James sat back in his chair, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Are you saying you're attracted to me? Isha nodded, slowly, her expression serious. Yes. My species forms deep connections during this time. It's instinctual, but it's also complicated. I don't expect anything from you. I just want you to understand what I'm going through. James felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't know what to say. He was still trying to wrap his head around the fact that he was living with an alien, let alone one that was dealing with something as personal as mating season. The idea of her being attracted to him, someone so normal, so human, was unsettling, even though she wasn't asking for anything from him. I understand, James said, though he wasn't sure he did. So what now? Isha met his gaze, her silver eyes steady. I will be respectful of your boundaries, James. I just need you to know that this season is a part of who I am. It's not something I can ignore or suppress easily. There was a long pause. James tried to think of something to say, but his mind was racing. He was caught in a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. Isha was still the same person she had been when they first met, calm, polite, and kind. But now there was something new in the air. "I appreciate you telling me," James said finally, trying to keep his tone light. "I'll just keep my distance, I guess. We'll just keep things normal." Aisha smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I would like that. But I also want you to feel comfortable. If you ever need to talk or if something feels too much for you, please don't hesitate to say something." "Thanks, I will," James replied, though inside he was still unsure how to navigate this new dynamic. Over the next few days, things grew more intense. Isha was often around, but she kept her distance in a way that was almost polite. There were moments when she would smile at him a little too long, her gaze lingering on him witty that made HFY. The days that followed seemed to stretch on endlessly for James. Living with Aisha during her mating season wasn't as easy as he had hoped. Despite her reassurances, her presence had become impossible to ignore. Her gaze was more intense than before. Her touch lingered just a second longer than necessary, and every time she smiled, it felt like there was a deeper meaning behind it. James tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting. He couldn't shake the thought of Isha's words, the part where she said her instincts were stronger during this time. It was hard to ignore the way she looked at him, the way she seemed to be pulling him into her world without saying a word. That evening after dinner, James sat down on the couch, his thoughts tangled in confusion. He had been trying to keep things normal, but Aisha's presence was making it harder each day. She had been more distant lately, as if she was giving him space, but it only made the air between them heavier. Every time she walked into a room, there was this unspoken tension that seemed to hang in the air. Isha entered the room, and for a moment, James didn't notice her. It was only when he felt her gaze on him that he looked up. Her eyes were soft, almost hesitant, but there was something else, something deeper that made him pause. She was standing by the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her, and her posture was slightly stiff. "James," she said, her voice unusually quiet. "I think it's time we talk about this again." James sat up straighter, his pulse quickening. He had expected this conversation, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to say. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," Isha continued, taking a slow step forward. "But my instinct, they're becoming harder to control. I can feel them, and I know you can too." James swallowed, unsure how to respond. I don't know what to do about it, Isha. You've made it clear that it's natural for your species, but it still feels strange to me. I'm just trying to figure out how to deal with it." Isha nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I get it. I don't want to push you, but I also don't want you to feel like you have to pretend everything's fine when it's not. You've been patient with me, and I appreciate that more than you know." The tension in the room grew thick, like an invisible wall between them. James wasn't sure if he was more confused by Aisha's behavior or the growing attraction he felt toward her. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. He was starting to understand how powerful her instincts were. And maybe, just maybe, they were affecting him more than he was willing to admit. "I'm not sure what you want from me," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. Isha took another step forward, and this time, James didn't move away. He stayed where he was, caught between a strange mix of fear and curiosity. She was standing closer now, and he could feel the heat radiating off of her, the intensity of her presence pulling him in. "I'm not asking for anything," Aisha said, softly. "I just need you to understand. The feelings I have right now, they're not something I can ignore. But I also know that this situation isn't easy for you. I won't force you into anything, James. I'm just asking you to be patient with me." Her words were calm, steady, but the weight of her emotions was palpable. James could feel it in his chest, the pull of something deeper, something he didn't fully understand. He had spent his entire life thinking he knew how to navigate relationships, but this was something else entirely. "I don't want to hurt you," Isha continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't fight this anymore. My instincts are too strong. I just need someone to be close to. James felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something, to comfort her, to ease the tension between them, but he didn't know how. Part of him wanted to pull away, to protect himself from whatever this was, but another part of him wanted to reach out, to offer her the connection she needed, even if he wasn't sure he was ready for it. I don't know what to say, James admitted, his voice low. I don't want to make things harder for you, Aisha. I really don't. But I don't think I'm ready for this. Isha's eyes flickered with sadness, but she didn't back away. Instead, she nodded slowly. I understand, she said quietly. I'm not asking for you to be ready, just to be aware of what's happening. It's not easy for me either. The silence between them deepened, and James felt his heart race in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but he was starting to feel like he was caught in a whirlwind, swept up in something he didn't know how to stop. Isha's presence was overwhelming, and despite his best efforts to keep things normal, he was beginning to realize that they could never go back to how things were before. I'll try, James said finally, his voice barely a whisper. I'll try to understand, but it's going to take time. This is a lot for me to process. Isha's expression softened, and for a moment, James saw the warrior within her falter. It was like she was letting down her guard, exposing the vulnerable side of herself that she kept hidden from the world. She wasn't just an alien warrior. She was someone who needed connection, just like everyone else. I know, she said quietly, and I'm sorry for making this so difficult. I just needed you to know what was happening. I didn't want you to think I was pushing you away or asking for too much. James took a deep breath and stood up, moving closer to her. Aisha, he said gently, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just trying to figure this out. We'll take it slow, okay? She looked up at him, her silver eyes shining in the dim light. For the first time in days, she seemed at peace, her tension easing as if his words had given her the comfort she needed. Thank you, James, Aisha whispered. As she turned away, James couldn't help but feel like he had just stepped into uncharted territory. There was so much more to learn about Isha, about her species, and about himself, and as the days passed, he knew that everything was about to change. The days that followed seemed to blur together for James. He was still trying to adjust to the idea of living with Aisha during her mating season, but the more time he spent with her, the more he realized how much he didn't understand about her. Her instincts, her behavior, it all seemed so different from what he was used to. But something about it, something about her, made him want to stay and learn more. It wasn't that he was attracted to her in the way one might expect. There were no sudden feelings of romantic love, no overwhelming desire. But there was something deeper, a connection that he couldn't quite place. He couldn't deny that the more he got to know Aisha, the more he saw her as more than just an alien. She was a person with feelings, fears, and desires just like anyone else. One afternoon, after a long day at work, James returned home to find the apartment quieter than usual. The usual hum of Isha's presence was gone, and for a moment, he thought she might have gone out. But as he walked through the door, he found her sitting in the living room, her eyes staring off into space. There was a softness to her expression that James had never seen before. She seemed lost in thought, her usually calm and composed demeanor giving way to something more vulnerable. Aisha, James called out gently, not wanting to startle her. Isha turned toward him slowly, and for a moment their eyes met. There was something in her gaze, something raw, that made his heart beat a little faster. It was like she was waiting for something, or perhaps hoping for something. James, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't hear you come in. He noticed the small, almost imperceptible change in her tone. It wasn't just the usual polite greeting. There was something more, something deeper, that made James feel like she was reaching out to him in a way that was hard to describe. Is everything okay? James asked, his voice full of concern. He had never seen her like this before. She was always so in control, so strong. But now there was a vulnerability in her that made him wonder if maybe he hadn't fully understood what she was going through. Isha took a deep breath, her gaze drifting toward the window, as if she were looking for the right words. I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about my instincts and everything that's happening. James stepped closer, his own heart racing with uncertainty. What do you mean? Isha's silver eyes found his again, but this time they seemed softer, more open. I've spent so much time trying to control my instincts, trying to keep them in check so I wouldn't push you away or make things uncomfortable. But lately it's been harder to do that. And I don't know how to explain it, but I feel connected to you in a way I didn't expect. James's breath caught in his throat. Connected how? I don't know, she said with a small, uncertain smile. It's not something I can explain in words. But I've never felt like this before. It's like something is drawing me to you. I know it's part of my species' mating season, but it feels different with you. You're not just a roommate, James. You're someone I trust. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. James wasn't sure how to respond. He wasn't in love with Isha. He wasn't even sure he understood what was happening. But the connection she was talking about, he could feel it too. It was subtle, like a quiet pull, a magnetic force that seemed to grow stronger every day. I trust you too, James said, his voice low but steady. But I'm still trying to understand everything. I don't know how to handle this. He waved his. The days had been strange, with the quiet tension growing between James and Isha. She was more withdrawn lately, respecting his space, but he could still feel the pull between them. There were moments when Aisha's eyes would linger on him for just a little too long, and James could see the battle happening within her. It was hard for her to fight her instincts, and it was just as difficult for James to navigate the emotional maze they were both trapped in. James spent more time in his room, trying to focus on work and avoid thinking about what was happening around him. He had told himself he wasn't ready for anything, that he needed time to process everything. But every time he saw Aisha, his heart raced, and every little gesture she made sent ripples of confusion through him. One evening, as the sun began to set, the apartment felt unusually quiet. The soft hum of the city outside couldn't penetrate the silence that hung heavy in the air. James had just finished making dinner and was sitting at the table when Aisha appeared in the doorway, her posture tense, her eyes wide and uncertain. James, she said softly, almost hesitantly, can we talk? James looked up from his plate, sensing the seriousness in her tone. Sure, what's on your mind? Aisha stepped into the room and closed the door gently behind her. Though she kept her distance, there was an air of finality about the way she moved, as though she had made a decision she couldn't take back. I've been thinking a lot, Isha began, her voice steady but with a hint of emotion James hadn't heard from her before. I don't want to drag this on any longer. My instincts, they're getting stronger. I've tried to control them to keep them from affecting you, but it's becoming impossible. And I need you to know something. James's stomach churned as he set down his fork, bracing himself. What do you mean? He asked, his voice low. Isha paused, collecting her thoughts. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to make you feel uncomfortable, but my species, during mating season, we act on our instincts. We connect deeply, not just physically, but emotionally. And while I've respected your space, my emotions have become overwhelming. I don't know how much longer I can fight it. James felt his chest tighten. He had known this moment would come, but hearing her say it out loud made everything feel so real. He hadn't expected it to be like this, not with Aisha, and definitely not in the way she was describing it. I don't want to make things harder for you, Aisha continued, her eyes flickering with vulnerability. But I need you to know that I care about you. I trust you, James, and I've never trusted anyone like this before. The words hit James like a sudden wave. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The confusion, the attraction, and the strange connection, he had been feeling all this time came rushing to the surface. He had been trying to fight it, to keep his distance, but now that Aisha had said those words, it felt like he couldn't ignore it anymore. "I trust you too," James finally said, his voice quieter than usual. "But I don't know what this means, Aisha. I don't know if I'm ready for this, whatever this is." Aisha's gaze softened, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I don't expect you to be ready. I just needed to tell you how I feel. I've been hiding it, trying to make it easier on both of us, but it's only making it harder." There was a long pause as James tried to process everything. He wasn't sure what he wanted. Part of him wanted to pull away, to keep things the way they had been before. But another part of him felt drawn to Aisha in a way he couldn't explain. She wasn't just an alien. She was a person. Someone who was going through something deeply personal, something he didn't fully understand, but he couldn't ignore how much he cared about her. "I don't want you to feel alone in this," James said, his voice steady, but unsure. "I just don't know what the next step is. I don't want to rush into anything, but I also don't want to push you away." Aisha took a deep breath and stepped closer to him, closing the distance between them. "I don't want to rush anything either, but we need to be honest with each other. I can't hold back anymore, James. Not when I know how I feel about you." James met her gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never imagined that this situation, this strange living arrangement, would lead to something like this. But now that they were here, now that the truth was out in the open, he felt a mixture of fear and excitement. There was no turning back. "I'm not saying I'm ready for everything," James said, his voice slightly shaking. "But I'm willing to try. I don't want to let fear hold me back. We can figure this out together, right?" Aisha's eyes lit up with relief, and for the first time in a long time she seemed to relax. "Yes, we'll take it one step at a time. We don't have to have all the answers right now." James smiled, though there was still uncertainty in his heart. He wasn't sure what this meant for their future, but one thing was clear. This was no longer just about sharing an apartment. It was about something deeper, something neither of them had expected. "I think that's the best we can do," James said, his voice steadying. "Take it one step at a time." Aisha nodded, her silver eyes warm with understanding. One step at a time. For the first time in days, the air between them felt lighter, and the tension seemed to ease just a little. They didn't have all the answers, but they had each other, and for now that was enough. The days that followed their conversation were quieter, but in a way that made James feel more at ease. Aisha was still herself, strong, reserved, and fiercely independent. But now there was something different. There was an understanding between them, an unspoken agreement to take things one step at a time, without rushing or pushing boundaries. They were both navigating uncharted waters, and though the path wasn't clear, they were moving forward together. James had spent a lot of time thinking about what Aisha had said. He wasn't sure when his feelings had started to shift, but now, in the quiet moments when he looked at her, he felt a connection that went deeper than just their living arrangement. She wasn't just a roommate anymore. She was someone he trusted, someone whose presence he could no longer ignore. It wasn't just her alien nature, it was her strength, her vulnerability, and the way she had opened up to him in a way that no one else had ever done. Aisha, on the other hand, seemed more at ease too. The tension that had once filled the apartment had slowly melted away. She still had her moments when her instincts would flare, and James could sense when she was fighting them, but now she seemed more in control of herself. They talked more, sometimes about simple things, work, hobbies, the oddities of human life that Aisha still found fascinating. But sometimes they also talked about deeper things, about the fear of the unknown, the uncertainty they both felt. One evening, James was sitting on the couch reading a book when Aisha walked into the room. She was holding something in her hand, a small object that seemed out of place. James looked up, curiosity piqued. "I found this while cleaning," she said, a soft smile on her face. "It's yours, isn't it?" James squinted at the object, in her hand, a small silver keychain he'd forgotten about. It had been a gift from his grandmother, something he used to carry with him everywhere. He hadn't realized it was missing until now. "Yeah, that's mine," James said with a smile. "I've been wondering where it went." Isha handed it to him, and their fingers brushed for a brief moment. It was a simple touch, but for some reason, it felt more intimate than it should have. James looked up at her, and she met his gaze. There was a quiet understanding between them, as though they had both come to terms with something unspoken. "You know," Aisha said, her voice soft, "I've been thinking about our situation, and I realized something. I've always tried to control everything, my instincts, my emotions. I thought I had to keep them in check, but the truth is I don't want to fight this connection with you anymore." James nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I feel the same way," he said. "I don't want to ignore it either. But I also don't want to rush things. We don't have to have all the answers right now." Isha smiled, her silver eyes reflecting the soft light from the lamp beside them. "I agree. We don't need to rush, but I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm grateful for this time we've had together. It's not what I expected, but it's been meaningful." James felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He hadn't expected to feel this way, to be standing at the edge of something new, something uncertain. But here they were, two people from completely different worlds, figuring things out together. "I'm grateful too," James said, his voice steady. "I never thought I'd be living with an alien, let alone someone I'd come to care about. But I'm glad we've been able to understand each other." Isha took a deep breath, and for a moment, her gaze softened. "I was afraid that I would push you away, that my instincts would be too much, too overwhelming. But you've been patient with me, James. I didn't expect that." James smiled, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "I've learned a lot from you, Aisha. You're not just an alien, you know. You're a person with your own struggles and emotions just like anyone else. I've come to respect that." There was a quiet pause, a comfortable silence that stretched between them. James wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment it didn't matter. They had come a long way from where they started. The connection between them wasn't about rushing into something they weren't ready for. It was about tending each own,